Saturday, March 5th, 2022. It's raining today, but not enough to wash away my sins. I've been trapped in my mind for the past decade, but I finally watched The Batman. After 2 years, 2 long years of suffering and waiting, I've watched The Batman, and it was the greatest thing I've ever seen. I bore witness to the biggest cinematic event of my lifetime. They haven't heard from me. They wonder where I went. They think I'm hiding in the shadows, but I am the shadows. I could be anywhere. And I'm back. And I'm here to strike.
Differently.
Hey, how you doing? Yes, it's true. The Batman is finally out in the theaters, and as I've said several times on the channel and in a blog post that was recently written by me and during the soft launch of the podcast, this is the most excited I've ever been for a movie. So, naturally the question on everybody's mind is, how was it? And my answer to that is, I genuinely believe that The Batman is a masterpiece. This film changed things forever. The Batman is a grand, ambitious, and artful cinematic experience. It is unlike anything I've ever seen before. It is a movie that at once feels intrinsic to the character of Batman, but also distinct from anything we've seen from the character before on the big screen. And it's this balancing act that really allows the Batman to cement its place not just as one of the better Batman films, but one of the best superhero films. It separates itself from even the greatest movies within the genre because of what Matt Reeves and his crew were able to accomplish with this movie. Gotham City finally comes alive in this nighttime odyssey of grime, filth, social rot, and moral decay, dipped in these incredible neo-noir visuals, courtesy of cinematographer Greg Fraser, who beautifully uses shadows and the color black in a way that I have never seen another movie do before. This movie fully commits to the idea of being a detective story, bringing Batman back to his roots as the world's greatest detective. Everything about this movie is so meticulously crafted, from the screenplay and the way that all of the plot points and threads intersect with one another to coalesce into a really satisfying conclusion at the end of this film. Everything about this movie is so deliberate, and all of the brilliant technical aspects elevate the movie even more, because Matt Reeves had a vision for this movie, and it was absolutely unassailable. His vision comes through in every single frame of the Batman. When you sit down to watch this movie, you are fully immersed. You are transported into a world that is really the mind of a modern and complex auteur. Matt Reeves is able to create this sense of immersion not just visually, but sonically and narratively. You are in Gotham City for the first time in a Batman film, and you really feel this sense of genuine sinister dread because this movie has such a powerful atmosphere and it gives off such a distinct aura that it gives the audience this sense of tension for the entire runtime, and it's absolutely thrilling. This movie works on every single level that a movie can. Matt Reeves' direction in The Batman is nothing short of excellent. He delivered 100%. The Batman is a movie that relies very much on the execution of really basic filmmaking techniques. But the thing is, when those basic techniques are executed with the precision that they are in The Batman, it heightens the movie to a level that I've just never experienced before. Certainly not within the comic book movie genre. The camera work is so deliberate and evocative. During the crime scenes of The Batman, the camera is just constantly creeping in or pulling out, depending on the situation and its place in the story, and it gives this sense of the walls really closing in on our characters. Gotham has a very claustrophobic feel because we are put into the singular perspective of Bruce Wayne, and that is incredibly refreshing because this is a movie about Batman, and that's very clear because we get several shots where we get a POV shot from inside the Batmobile, on Bruce Wayne's motorcycle, through Bruce Wayne's cowl. There is so much in this movie that is just so deliberate and pinpoint accurate to what Matt Reeves wanted to do that it is just incredibly effective. And in addition to Matt Reeves' directing skills, you have an instantly iconic score from Michael Giacchino, who, in my opinion, single-handedly composed not only the best Batman theme, but I think one of the best movie soundtracks in a very long time. I actually heard people talking about the score when this movie ended and everybody was walking out of the theater, and I don't need to tell you how rare that is, but I think it speaks to the talent of Michael Giacchino and also speaks to the quality of the score and the music here, because there are so many scenes that unfold in the Batman that are already so effective because of its narrative and the performances, but these scenes are taken to an entirely different level thanks to the music. The emotion that is elicited because of the music in sync with Fraser's cinematography is incredibly moving. And speaking of Greg Fraser, it cannot be stressed enough how remarkable his work is in The Batman, because this movie looks beautiful. It is just an incredible movie to look at. And I don't think I've seen a movie that has a visual aesthetic quite like this, because this movie has such a true sense of genuine oppressive darkness that other movies, especially other Batman movies, just don't have. Greg Fraser is able to craft these images in the Batman that will sit with you long after the movie has ended. There are so many shots in this movie that I can't stop thinking about. The most recognizable is obviously the upside down shot of Batman walking towards the Penguin after the Batmobile chase. That's just the most obvious example of how effective the scene composition, the framing, and the blocking of these scenes is. But there are so many other shots in this movie that will take your breath away. And all of these technical aspects of the film coming together elevate an incredibly strong narrative. Matt Reeves was so committed to making this a detective story, and it is incredibly well done. The A plot and the B plot complement each other perfectly, and when the two come together at the end of the film and lead into the climax and eventually the conclusion of the movie, it is a movie that you will need to watch again, because it rewards repeat viewings and you will find yourself catching things that you didn't the first time. This is a complex movie, but it's not convoluted in the slightest. You can absolutely follow everything that's happening, and I couldn't help but appreciate what Matt Reeves did. This movie is incredibly well written. Matt Reeves co-wrote the screenplay with Peter Craig, and they both did a fantastic job, especially because this movie is almost 3 hours long, and it did not feel like it at all. This movie flew by thanks to its deliberate pacing and perfect execution of the scenes. There are just so many scenes that play out in this really slow burn speed, but it's so effective for the story that this movie is trying to tell, and it's also extremely effective because it suits the character of Batman. Everything about Batman is controlled and deliberate, and I think when you have the cinematography and the pacing and the patience that this movie does, it really complements not just the main character of this film, but the narrative and the screenplay. It has so many things going for it that you just find yourself swept away in the experience. And I love detective movies. I love film noir as a style. And Matt Reeves is able to bring the neo-noir style to the Batman, and I couldn't be happier. Everything from the use of shadows to the gloriously overbaked voiceover by Bruce Wayne as if he was ripped straight from a 1940s neo-noir pulp film is absolutely incredible. I loved every single second of it. This movie takes notable inspiration from David Fincher's seminal detective film Seven and his remarkable serial killer drama Zodiac. This movie does admittedly borrow several visual cues from David Fincher's Seven, but because this template is so appropriate for the character of Batman, I don't really mind. But I will acknowledge that this movie not only takes visual cues, but it also follows several plot beats that Seven has, and if you're as big of a fan of that movie as I am, you will recognize so many similarities between the two movies. But although I can acknowledge that this is something that happens in the film and it's something that's very apparent to me, I didn't mind in the slightest, because there's just something about this movie that still feels distinctly its own. And I think a big part of this is the character of Batman. This is the Batman that I've always wanted to see on the big screen. Robert Pattinson is single-handedly, without a doubt, the best live-action Bruce Wayne we've ever seen. And the biggest reason for this is because he is not giving his own interpretation of the character. He is just playing Bruce Wayne. He's just playing Batman. In the past, it felt like what we were getting from actors when they took on this role, no matter how talented they were, it felt like they were trying to give their own spin on this iconic comic book character. It felt like Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne. It felt like Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne. In this movie, it doesn't feel like Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne. It feels like Bruce Wayne. There's something to be said about Robert Pattinson's performance in this movie because it blew me away. In my opinion, it is the best performance in a comic book movie that I've ever seen because it is so nuanced and layered, and there's so much depth to Pattinson's performance because he plays a Bruce Wayne that is so heavily enveloped in his grief and pain over the loss of his parents that he cannot connect with the real world. He can't function outside of Batman. He cannot form relationships with other people. No matter how hard he wants to try, no matter how badly he wants to be normal, he just can't because he can't let go of the trauma that he's been through. And to me, Bruce's character arc in this movie is incredibly moving and very emotional because there are so many scenes in this movie where Robert Pattinson just delivers such an emotional gut punch by not saying anything. He will share scenes with several actors, whether it's Jeffrey Wright or Zoe Kravitz, and these will be lengthy dialogue scenes. And Batman has very little to say, but the thing is, it's what he doesn't say that makes the performance special. Because you can see in his eyes, you can see in his facial expressions that he wants to say something. He wants to say how he truly feels, but he just can't. There are two really powerful moments in this movie where Bruce Wayne connects with the son of the recently deceased mayor in the film, and you can tell that Bruce sees himself in this child, but he cannot bring himself to say anything to this kid. And there's a scene towards the end of the movie where Batman has an exchange with Lieutenant Gordon, and he wants to say something, and we all know what he wants to say, but he can't say it. He says something, but not what he truly feels. And it's things like this. It's what he doesn't say. It's the guarded words with which he uses to speak, and the acting that is done with his eyes that really show what an incredible performance Robert Pattinson gives in this movie. It is breathtaking. I cannot get enough of it. He is the best Batman I've ever seen. I was so happy watching this movie because I felt like that was Batman. You know, it was a comic book brought to life, and he was just inhabiting this world. And speaking of the performances, every single person in this movie brought it. Jeffrey Wright is absolutely magnetic as Jim Gordon. He brings everything he has to every single scene, and he delivers this dialogue, this honestly really pulpy noir dialogue with such gravitas that he sells it. You know, it never feels silly. It never feels over the top. He commands your attention every time he speaks, and he really feels like a police officer who is trying to do good in a city that is just so plagued by anger and crime and corruption, and he's really just had enough to the point where he reached that point of desperation and he has to rely on Batman. And his dynamic with Batman is beautiful. This is the best Gordon-Batman relationship we've ever seen on screen, because they are essentially partners in this movie. Not only are they friends, but they actually work the case together, just like Mills and Somerset do in Seven. That's the dynamic that Batman and Gordon have in this movie, and I loved every single second of it. I totally bought their relationship. Everything from the way Gordon called him man, as if, you know, they've been friends for a long time, to the way Batman and Gordon distinctly expressed trust only in one another in a world that is so corrupt and questionable. Zoe Kravitz brings a sense of vivaciousness to the Batman with her performance as Catwoman, and I think that she brings an energy to the role that we really haven't seen since Michelle Pfeiffer played Catwoman in 1992's Batman Returns. And I think with more character development down the line, Zoe Kravitz probably is going to end up being the best Catwoman. In my opinion, she probably already is, because I always thought that Michelle Pfeiffer was a little too over the top. But with more character development, I can definitely see Zoe Kravitz going on to become the best Catwoman, but she really sells not only this sense of liveliness in the movie, and her natural charisma allows her to really set up this love connection between her and Bruce, and it's believable. You believe that these are two broken people that are longing for one another, and they just don't know it. They are essentially two broken pieces of the same puzzle, and even though they have conflicting ideologies, they're somehow perfect for each other. They match despite this ideological difference, and this dynamic is something that's captured really well, and it's a dynamic that I don't think has been captured very effectively before on the big screen. Colin Farrell as Penguin is a standout. Despite his limited screen time, he is able to come through under those heavy prosthetics, but his performance comes through and you can tell he's having a good time, and I really look forward to seeing his character being developed as well. John Turturro as Carmine Falcone, he's doing the Brando thing like he should be in Godfather, but god damn it if it doesn't work for me. Andy Serkis is a great Alfred despite his limited screen time, and I think although his interactions start off cold with Bruce, it really works for me because it's just thematically consistent with the character arc that this Bruce has to go through. And we reach this sort of emotional catharsis between Bruce and Alfred during the second act of the film, and it's a really big step for Bruce. Matt Reeves' vision for this film comes through in every single frame. Every single frame as the rain assaults the streets of Gotham and danger seems to lurk within all of the darkness and shadows that plague the city. Everything from the directing to the writing to the dialogue to the performances to the action, the cinematography, the music, and the editing come together to deliver the definitive big screen Batman experience. This is a movie that just fundamentally understands the character of Batman and finally gives us a Bruce Wayne that goes from being a young, angry, revenge-driven young man to realizing that he has to be more than that for Gotham City. He has to inspire hope within the people. He has to be a hero, because it is through his own pain and trauma that he is able to transform and fight and endure. And this is what Batman is about. That's what he's always been about. We finally have a movie that shows us the war that Bruce Wayne wages every single day, every single night when he puts on that cape and cowl is not with the criminals of Gotham City. It's with himself. The Batman is grandiose, complex, challenging, and thoughtful. It is a movie that is both intense and hard-edged and visceral, but soulful and passionate. The Batman is easily the best Batman film ever made, and easily one of the best comic book films ever made, and honestly, it is probably one of my favorite movies of all time already. The Batman is truly an artful blockbuster of the highest order, and I highly recommend it to every single one of you. This movie is worth your time, more so than anything I've seen in years. Thank you for watching, everybody. Have a good night. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy. And Selena, take care of yourself.